Today's video is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be doing a presentation, and this is in preparation for a speech I have in about 3 weeks. So my goal here is well, I've done the presentation, I've made the presentation, I have somewhat of a script, and so my goal here is to run through that presentation and see if I can get it down to maybe around 25 minutes, because I have around 30 minutes for the whole speech. But with that said, I want to make a note about presentations, and not just a PowerPoint presentation like I'll be doing, but also any presentation where you're trying to convey information in order to get someone to take action, right? Because for me, my presentation, the desired effect I want for people, the change I want to make for them, or change I want to bring among them, is for them to consider marketing more deeply and to take actions, do better marketing, basically. I want them to enroll in that journey. And for you, it might be a presentation, maybe you're going to do a speech, or maybe it might be just for a patient, where you are presenting information in such a way that you want them to accept treatment. So we really have it backwards, because a lot of the times, if you see how people do presentations, it's just information dumping. And when you have a mismatch of what you want and what the audience wants, then that can be very problematic. People don't necessarily care about what you care about, they don't necessarily know what you know, and they don't necessarily want what you want. So we have to organize our presentation and deliver it in such a way that it creates enrollment, that we get people who want very different things to align with what we see is better for them, the vision that we see for them. All right, so think back to when you were forced to learn something. The teacher might be telling you to learn something, they might be teaching you a topic that you really don't care about. Information goes in 1 year, it goes out the next, like after you're done with the test. Contrast that with maybe a hobby that you have where you're enrolled in that journey, you want to learn. So you go out of your way without any external force telling you to. You go out of your way to learn all these different concepts, these different nuances about the subject, and you get better and better at it. So that's what happens when you get enrollment. So our goal with the presentation should not be information dumping. It should not be telling people the situation and hoping that they will process it the same way that we might. We have to take the stance of owning the result, and the result that we want is persuasion. We want enrollment. So the best way to do that is going to be through a narrative. Because how do people learn? Well, since the ages or dawn of time, or whatever you want to say, it's been stories. We learn through stories. We are receptive to stories. We're not really receptive to information with no context, and many times that's kind of what it comes out as. Right? If you just information dump and you have reached a favorable outcome, that's good, but we can improve it. We can improve the chances of people tuning in, to actually listening to what you have to say, and becoming enrolled in the journey, therefore accepting treatment or whatever it is that you want to do with presentation. All right, so narrative, let's talk about that for a second. Narratives are a story. Like if you go into a movie, you're there to watch a narrative unfold. All narratives have certain elements in common. One big one is there has to be a main character. There has to be some hero. And this is concepts from StoryBrand that I've kind of adjusted to. I've kind of gotten rid of some of the things that I don't think are necessary. But there's a main character, there's a hero, and that hero has to be your patient, or whoever, or the audience if you're doing a PowerPoint presentation. Now that hero faces a problem. So there has to be a problem. A lot of the times if you go to the movies, or every time, there is a major problem that the main character will encounter. In every movie, there's a problem. If you don't have a problem, things aren't interesting. There's nothing at stake. So what is the problem? We have to state that very clearly in our presentation. What is the cost of avoiding or not accomplishing the goal? So if the hero in the movie can't defeat the bad guy, what's the costs? Is the White House going to blow up? Are people going to die? Are they going to lose all their teeth? Are they going to be in more pain? What is the costs of not addressing the problem. And then what is the other side? What's the flip side? What is the benefits of getting it? Does the hero get the girl at the end of the movie? Does he become super successful or something? Right? What is the benefit? So we create a problem, and we create two divergent scenarios, and the rest of the movie is about how can we get to the top, right? And once they reach it, we get to a climax. And it doesn't have to be that linear. In StoryBrand, he recommends, or he doesn't recommend, he suggests, he gives us a linear framework. But if you look at movies, those are the most boring movies, right? The best narratives you can tell have twists and turns. Like they have unexpected twists at the end. That was the bad guy, like, oh, he's actually a good guy. This creates an interest in the actual story that you're going to tell. And I'm not saying you have to create something this complicated every time. It can be very linear, but what I'm trying to say is that it's important to be interesting. It's important to have a narrative that is going to get someone to tune in, especially if it's like going to help them a lot for them to accept whatever it is that you want them to accept. All right, and finally, we have the call to action, where we remind them of the costs of inaction. If you're someone who wants this, then you must do this. If not, here's the costs. And if you do, then here's the benefits, right? That's all presentation really is. We've really complicated it. We've made all these technical terms for sales, or we just default to throwing information at people, which also doesn't work as well. So presentation, you must take the goal. The goal of presentation must be to persuade someone, to get them to enroll in that journey that you seek for them. And then it's going to be to tell a narrative, to get them to enroll by telling this narrative. The narrative must be interesting. It must have a hero. It must have problems. It must have a cost and a heaven, a future heaven. And at the end, you must call them to action. All right? So that's my spiel on presentations. And now let's get into my presentation. Okay, before we get into the actual presentation itself, I just want to give you a couple of tips and tricks that I use to make presentations a bit more persuasive. So let's get into it. So it's kind of a behind the scenes. So the first thing I do is I'm going to create my narrative here, and I use Google Slides because I want to be accessible. If I use a different device, or if I'm not home, if I have to use a different computer or my phone, I can always access it from Google Slides because it's online. But then the presentation itself, we're going to do it on Keynote. And the reason we use Keynote is that it adds another layer of polish when it comes to the actual presentation. You're able to create better animations, the images look better, and so on. So Keynote is going to be a better way of delivering a more polished presentation. You can design more, you can customize more stuff and so on. Now, another reason that I use Google Slides here is that instead of writing it out on a document, what I can do here is that each slide, I'm just gonna have one main idea. So we're here to understand growth. Everything experiences a state of growth. Here's the definition of it, right? So each thing is just one idea, and it's going to represent one slide. So we're here to understand growth. Everything goes through growth, right? Here's the biological definition. So this is essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating the entire narrative first. And if I don't like something, or if something seems a bit weird, what I can do is I can just rearrange stuff really easily, and it's going to serve as the foundation and framework for my entire story. And of course, I've done a lot of rearranging, so it's very helpful. Yeah, another thing is that during the presentation itself, it's really helpful to have a clicker instead of being right behind the computer, looking at the monitor and just clicking through each different frame, each different slide. Here, I can just have this and I can walk around, I can click. So let me show you if I can show you right here. If I click this, it goes to the previous one. If I click here, it goes to the next one. And it lets me walk around and engage with the room a bit better, which helps with the actual persuasion of it. Right, and here I have all my images that I've used on the slides itself, and it's helpful, or this is really nice to have just in case something goes wrong, you delete something and you can't recover it, you have to figure out where it was. Everything is stored in here. And finally, for the presentation itself, I have a custom presenter display. So what I can see is the current slide. Let's actually go to a different one. So I can see the current slide, I can see the next slide, what's coming up, I can see how much time has elapsed, I can see what time it is right now, and also if I have any notes I can put right here. So I can walk around, do the presentation, know what's coming next, and I can also, if I get stuck, come back to the presenter notes and, figure out what train of thought I've lost. So that's it for the preparation. Hopefully that's pretty helpful. So as I get into the presentation now, my goal is going to be to do this in one take, to try to present it on the spot. I don't have the script memorized, and what I did was at first I created the script, and then I created the slides, and now I'm going to go and actually try to present it. If I find that for some reason I have difficulty creating a flow in the story itself, then I'll probably go back to the drawing board and fix some stuff or just work on my delivery. But yeah, that's the idea. So let's get into it. Okay, this is actually take 2 because I failed miserably. And I realized how unprepared I was, but let's try this again. All right, so the first few seconds, I'm gonna spend just, all right, there we go. Yeah, the first few seconds I'm just gonna spend leaving it alone, letting people settle in, and I think it's gonna take maybe about a minute or so, but I'll get started now. So today we're here to talk about the phenomenon called growth. And what we see is that everything goes through a state of growth. From Los Angeles, at the top we have this old photo of Los Angeles, and now we can see what it looks like today. To butterflies who go through metamorphosis and grow from a caterpillar into something that can fly. And even babies, as we know, go through a state of growth. And biologists define this as an increase in size and structural complexity. So here I found this cool video of a salamander that starts as a single cell that divides into 2 cells, then 4, then 8, and 16, and 32, until by the end it grows into a very complex and larger salamander. And it's easy to, or what we also see is that this happens in organizations as well. But some organizations look like this. So this is Google back in 1998 with Sergey Brin and Larry Page starting Google in their garage. Now in 2024, when this photo was taken, this is one of Google's 70 offices, and this is called the Google Plex. So we can see that they've gone through a massive state of growth, whereas other companies look like this. So what is the difference between Google and Blockbuster? And I think that comes down to adaptation. So imagine an environment. This is the Galapagos Islands. So imagine there is a lot of nuts and not many insects. And you had a beak that was great for nuts. Then you would survive and thrive, and essentially you would go through the phases of growth, of growing, of increasing in size and complexity, or if you're an organization, increasing the size of your office and maybe the number of offices that you have. Whereas if you had the wrong strategy of having a very narrow beak, then you wouldn't grow in that way. You'd be essentially like Blockbuster. You would eventually die out. So this is why adaptation is so important. But luckily, so why is this all tricky? If we can just identify the current environment and align our strategy to meet that environment, why is it so tricky? Well, it's because the environment today is changing faster and faster than ever before. So this is a video of Boston Dynamics robot that they released a couple months ago. And this is kind of crazy to see today. And this is what computers looked like back in the day. And everything that you see in that photo on the left is less powerful than what you see in that single phone on the right. And this is within a span of around 20 or 30 years. So the environment is changing faster than ever. And today is the most normal that things will ever be. So we're faced with the fork in the road. When it comes to picking our strategy, I think we have two paths. The first is to lock our eyes into the rearview mirror and to see what has worked in the past and let that guide our strategy moving into the future. To see what others are doing, to see what worked for others, and to just copy it. But the problem with that strategy is that it's too costly. It keeps us as a copycat, and so it makes us commodities. And when we're commodities, we have to fight for prices. We have to be a little bit cheaper, or maybe a little bit more convenient, which is why people are so fixated on the 5-mile radius, hoping that a better competitor doesn't come along. So the alternative, the approach that I seek for you, that I think would be better if we took, is to see the future and to meet the future, to see where things are heading and to do the work of aligning with it ahead of time so that by the time that the future arrives, we are adapted already. So unlike finches, we can choose our strategy, and what we can do is have the perfect beak when the environment changes for that environment. All right, and we can accomplish this in 3 steps. The first is to understand the principles, then it's to see the trends, and finally it's to align our strategy with the trends, with the future. So if we understand the principles, or if we can do this successfully, what we can do is we can find the perfect beak for the future environment. What we can do is assess what the future will be like to a very close degree and find the perfect beak for that environment and benefit from it. And we won't always get this right. And we see large corporations failing at this as well, investing millions and millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars, into products that end up flopping. But this is the path we have to take, where the alternative is to just show up as a commodity. And as Mark Cuban famously said, you only need to be right once. And as Mark Cuban said, you only need to be right once. So let's get into the principles. And the first principle that we want to, and the main principle that we want to focus on today is going to be the principle of attraction, which states that attraction equals alignment times awareness. So what is attraction? Attraction is simply someone's willingness to work with you. And this doesn't have to be just as a patient-dentist relationship. This can be as a business partner. This can be as a spouse. This can be as a friend. If they are aligned, if you're aligned with their beliefs about what better is or what good is, then they're going to be much more likely to be attracted to you. So do you fit their beliefs about what better is, or are you out of alignment? And once you have alignment, do they even know about that alignment? If they don't know, then it doesn't matter how aligned you are because they simply just don't know. Whoa, what is this? So this is trends. All right, so the next thing we're going to be looking at is, all right. So that was the first principle, and now we're going to be looking at trends. So when we see trends, we're able to predict what the future is going to look like. The main trend, the defining trend that we're seeing is that the power to influence decision making is moving away from corporations and companies and moving towards the individual. So let's talk about some of the bad trends that are encapsulated by this overarching idea that power to influence decision making is moving towards the individual. The first is that individuals are growingly skeptical of authority. This is an image of Big Tobacco testifying to Congress that smoking doesn't cause cancer or isn't harmful at all. Think of how much backlash there was and how much hesitancy there was around vaccines when COVID-19 came around because of the distrust and skepticism of the authorities. And now when we run promotions Like what happened to Black Friday? Back then you used to get good deals, but now if something says they're 50% off, we wonder to ourselves, did they just double the price beforehand? The second trend is that the people's default is to ignore and reject. So we're 10 times more advertised to than our parents, and our parents are 10 times more advertised to than their parents. So we're 100 times more advertised to than our grandparents. And so to maintain sanity, our brain's defense mechanism is to ignore and reject things. The default state is to just ignore and reject things in order to maintain sanity. And what we see is that there's a war between advertisers and individuals, and the individuals are winning. So this was back in the day, that if you were advertising, you basically had 100% of the reach that you wanted. But this is advertising today, that if you're advertising, 52% of the people have some sort of ad blocker on. And I won't get into the details of digital advertising versus physical advertising. Just know, or take my word that digital advertising is the more effective of the two, and it's what we care about. So 52% of your advertisements are essentially, or 52% of the people that you seek to influence are essentially out of the equation. They've removed themselves. And as this trend grows, as we move forward into the future, this disparity will grow. The third bad trend is that companies' ability to affect platforms are diminishing. Back then, we stressed SEO so much because our ability to influence platforms was significant. You could pay someone to rank yourself very highly on Google, on platforms that had people's attention, and as a result, you can benefit from it. But what Google found was that that was causing a bad user experience. People were leaving Google to use sites like Yelp because the results that were being shown were so heavily manipulated that it wasn't giving people a genuine reflection of businesses that were around them, or even good businesses. Like there were businesses in Santa Monica showing up in Anaheim for a dental office. And so what Google did, or what would happen back in the day, was that Google would create patches, that they would update their algorithm to combat all these like companies trying to hack the system. And marketers would develop a way to improve their ranking. Then Google would wipe it out in one go. Then marketers would develop another way, and then Google would wipe it out, and then marketers would develop another way, and so on and so forth, until Google decided to get rid of SEO altogether. And now what they do is they prioritize Google business profiles. This appears on top of SEO, and if you're playing the game of SEO, you're essentially playing for scraps, because most of the decision making and results are being influenced by Google business profiles, which gives the companies themselves very little in terms of their ability to influence their rankings. But what we're seeing is that people are still trying to influence rankings. They're trying to leverage things like incentives in order to get more reviews and to get an unfair advantage. And what we can learn from history is that whenever there is some way for people to get an unfair advantage, the platform, it's in their best interest to combat that, so that the actual results are a reflection of reality and therefore give the users a better experience. If not, some other company is going to accomplish that, and as a result, users are going to go onto that platform. We saw this big scramble happen when ChatGPT came along and was giving access to better information than Google was. So as the ability for companies to affect and influence platforms decrease, they give us one last option, which is to pay to win, which is why advertising is growing so much, and people are now relying on advertising as the last lever. But the problem is that if you know anything about advertising, you might know that tracking, the ability to look at the data and make iterative improvements based on it, is a critical component of it. it helps us make better advertisements and helps us ultimately create an advertisement that is profitable. But these tracking, our ability to track is being throttled. And this is a email that I received a couple of weeks ago, and this is something that I receive like every 2 or 3 months. Just additional data sharing restrictions or additional data restrictions. They restrict your ability to create better ads. Back in the day, you could probably get away with like running an ad and you could maybe do well because the costs were so low. But as we'll see, the costs aren't that low anymore. And so it's likely that the first ads that you run are going to be unprofitable, and it's going to take a lot of iterations using data to create an ad that is profitable. And since we can't do that, the amount of time and money that it's going to take to find a profitable ad just increases. All right, and finally, the last trend is that things are getting way too crowded. So back to SEO, where everyone started thinking that we could just manipulate the rankings and do well. We've hyper fixated on visibility. And what this has done is that it's created dependence on advertising. And as platforms have removed our ability to influence organically the results that users see, everyone has kind of shifted over to advertising. And when you have so many people who are competing in an auction, because that's how advertising works online, we're all competing to show up for a specific search someone's doing or a specific psychographic, a specific audience on Facebook. When you have an auction, the person who is willing to lose the most money is the winner. And so if you seek to make $1,000 from advertising, maybe you're willing to pay $900 for it, but your competitor is willing to pay $950 for it, and you're maybe willing to pay $999 for it, and so on and so forth. And so profit margins essentially are wiped out. And the way to win advertising is to increase the average lifetime value of each patient. So that if you seek to make, or let's say, if you seek to make $1,000 per patient, and your competitor has all the systems in place to make $2,000 for the same patient, then they can outbid you because you can't compete for that. But the problem with increasing lifetime value in healthcare is that when we try to intentionally raise the amount of money we can extract from someone, that becomes a very slippery slope, and I think it's better not touching that at all. All right, so let's talk about the good trends. First is that choice, our ability, the individual's ability to choose, grows niche demand. So unlike a physical store like Walmart or CVS, Amazon doesn't have shelf space. That means they don't need to maximize the amount of profit a certain shelf has. So they can list all these different things. And the internet and online stores has brought this phenomenon where now they can list very niche items and people can find it. So as this happens, and Chris Anderson wrote about this, that there's going to be the head, which are blockbusters, mega brands, basically things that sell in large volume, mass marketing. And there's going to be the long tail, which are more niche items, very choice, very unique items that not many people want. But what we see is that now the long tail outsells the head, that there's more in terms of profit, in terms of margins and revenue when it comes to the long tail. So people are they're being empowered to choose more niche things. Another thing is that people are empowered to travel. So here, I think we forget that we have cars and we focus so much on a 5-mile radius, but people can travel very far. And if it's too far to go by car, people can travel by plane. Yet we focus on a 5-mile radius. Well, I know a dentist who I met with, and she was going to go fly out to Florida for a seminar because she saw the value in it, right? But what we do is we fixate on this 5-mile radius, and I think we're setting ourselves up for failure by focusing on people who don't care enough about dentistry, who don't care enough about what you do, that they're unwilling to travel more than 5 miles to visit you. I think we're holding ourselves back. So what if instead we could be meaningful to a 30-mile radius? And this is essentially a 1 hour drive. It's not ridiculous. Plenty of people travel an hour for things they find meaningful, but we're not taking this approach of becoming meaningful for people. The second trend is that word of mouth is amplified. So back to the idea of advertising. It's becoming more expensive and more difficult to have people who don't want to listen to us, to get them to listen to us. Yet what we see is that with word of mouth, it's cheaper and easier than ever before to get someone who wants to listen to us to listen to us. So here's a brief history of messaging, how things have evolved. So we started off with smoke signals. Then it moved on to carrier pigeons. Then the telegram. And surprisingly, after the telegram comes the Pony Express. And then we get phone operators. And then we get the fax machine, pagers, the cell phone, and this is the founder of a cell phone, I don't know his name. And finally, we get the Motorola flip phone with AI built in. So what we see is that with each iteration, it's getting cheaper and easier to send and receive messages from people that we want to hear. And we live in a world that is more connected than ever with cheaper and easier communication. So here's a kid who, anyone can start a YouTube channel. They can transmit information. Our ability to transmit information, to search for information and find information is incredibly enhanced, and it's getting stronger every day. So as we said before, the power to influence decision making is moving away from the companies towards the people, towards the individuals. And what we see is that now it's not about companies influencing people, it's about individuals influencing each other. Information now flows laterally rather than from organization to person. So the question shouldn't be, where do we rank on Google? Because that's a thing of the past. The question that is going to align us to the future, where it's cheaper and easier to communicate and people are more connected than ever, in this environment, are people telling others about us? Because if they're not, then we have a really big issue. Are they making a remark about us? What we can see from advertising is that it is more costly than ever because of crowding. It's less effective than ever because of regulations. There's a diminishing audience who don't want to hear from us and who are growing more distrustful of us. Therefore, the future will benefit those who focus on alignment rather than awareness, because awareness is largely solved. The world is connected, that if you're strongly aligned with an individual, they will do awareness for you on your behalf. So let's talk about bottled water for a minute. Bottled water, the thing where 64% of bottled waters are just tap water. It's the ultimate commodity. There's about 2,800 different companies that create bottled water. And there's hundreds of different water brands. So here is, I forgot his name, Mark Cesario. So Mark Cesario was a graphic designer. And one day he noticed, he was at a metal concert and he noticed some people drinking water out of a Monster can. And he wondered why, but these were people who were considered in the community straight edge. And straight edge basically means that you abstain from drugs and alcohol. And in that hardcore metal environment, they felt out of place drinking a bottle of water. So that's why they put it into a Monster can. So he thought to himself, what if I can repackage water and create something that these people will find or will help these people be more comfortable in the environment that they enjoy being in. And so he created this design, and then he spent $1,500 to promote the idea, which generated 3 million views and ultimately 100,000 followers on Facebook, more than Aquafina had generated in their entire lifetime of existing as a company. And this was within a few days. And now, 7 years later, Liquid Death is worth $1.4 billion. But the important thing to note about his growth is that it wasn't his budget doing the heavy lifting. $1,500 will not get you this level of views and engagement unless you create something remarkable, because this was essentially the people who aligned so closely with it telling everyone around them. It was them making a remark. So what is remarkable? Simply something worth making a remark about. But what's more interesting is how it happens. Remarkable is a byproduct of aligning so deeply with the person's belief of who they are or who they aspire to be that they gladly share it with others as a representation of who they are. So everyone loves talking about themselves, and in a vacuum, they'll probably end up discussing things about themselves. And here is this is just simply a parent who is telling other parent how good of a parent they are, right? Yet this is like, we don't create this. This is an opportunity for dentists to do a similar thing, right? This is a tactical thing. But what we can learn from this is that remarkability can be intentionally designed. So here's a very brief overview on how we can be remarkable. Step 1, choose the smallest viable audience. It's tempting to try to appeal to the masses, but the problem is that mass is too diverse. Too many people want too many things, and when we try to appeal to everyone, we end up appealing to no one. So what we can do instead is to focus in on the smallest viable audience. And then we stand a chance of creating something that they will resonate deeply with. The second step, after we identify the smallest viable audience, is to figure out what patterns, identify the patterns in their beliefs. What is their definition of better, not ours? Because when we focus on our definitions, it becomes clinical excellence, experience, material quality, newer technology, shorter wait times, cheaper prices. But to your patients, they might not necessarily care about any of these. To your small viable audience, they might not care about any of these. What is that blank slide? Step 3 is to, so what we have to do is understand what they would consider better and align with that, which is step 3. Align every aspect of your practice with their patterns of beliefs. It's not about our patterns. Piece by piece, we start to align every aspect of our practice to what they would consider better, and we get better and better and better until one day we become the best for them. And when we become the best, we become remarkable for them, and we get to harness the power of word of mouth. And step 4, finally, we get the word out. We understand marketing, we have it backwards. Everyone starts with step 4 first. What we have to understand is that most seeds don't grow, that it takes the right conditions, the right climate, the right soil, the right amount of water, and so on, in order, distance from other plants, in order for a seed to grow. And what we've done here is essentially done the work of finding the perfect place to plant your seed. Now, getting the word out is like adding fertilizer to it, which will help it grow faster and stronger. So now we use advertising as something we eventually graduate from, where we can stop doing and let word of mouth take over instead of relying on it like a crutch. Because relying on it like a crutch and create dependence on it. So we have to avoid the temptation to look in the rearview mirror and to show up as a commodity, because people today are demanding more meaningful things. They're choosing more meaningful things. And if you show up as a commodity, showing up just a little bit cheaper or a little bit more convenient, you're too easy to ignore. People are choosing more and more meaningful things that align deeply with what they find valuable. And if you seek to grow, if you seek to grow and thrive, you must become remarkable. All right, so I noticed a lot of, that's the presentation. Hope you guys liked it. I noticed a lot of definitely my flow wasn't there. I think it would help if I go through the entire narrative again a couple times before I present for sure. I know there's a lot of things I missed that I wanted to say. So just revisiting that. So I intend to, and my delivery definitely was off. So, but timing wise is okay. I could shorten it down a bit. So I'm not too worried about that. But basically, it's going to be the flow, some slide issues I could fix, and getting this like so comfortable with the script and the flow that I can actually add more emotion next time, because the whole time I was my attention was just focused on what's coming next and what do I have to say. So that's it. Hope you guys liked it. Hope you guys found it valuable. And if you guys did find this presentation persuasive and you want to do the work of becoming remarkable, I'll add my course in the description. It's completely free. Check it out. I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.